The morning sun had barely risen over the Minneapolis horizon, but Aisha's apartment was already buzzing with the energy of a new day. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of pancakes sizzling on the griddle. Aisha, a black woman in her early 30s, with skin that radiated the strength of her roots and eyes that carried the depth of her experiences, moved with impressive agility. Her hair, in long, well-kept braids, swayed gently with each step. She was the personification of resilience, a single mother who masterfully balanced the demands of her promising career in technology with raising her two children, Jamal and Nia. Her life was a constant dance between code and cuddles, between tight deadlines and bedtime stories. She firmly believed in the power of education and representation, and her greatest ambition was to pave the way for her children and other black children to dream without limits. Jamal, her eldest son, 10 years old, already showed an insatiable curiosity for the digital world, his agile fingers on the tablet keyboard, building worlds in virtual blocks. Nia, the youngest, 7, was a ray of sunshine with a smile that lit up any room and an imagination that transformed the living room rug into an ocean of adventures. For Aisha, they were her engine, the reason for every sacrifice, the inspiration for every victory. That day, the energy in the apartment was even more palpable. Aisha had secured a prominent position at Innotech Solutions, one of Minneapolis's most renowned technology companies. It was a significant leap in her career, a recognition of years of hard work and her passion for innovation. She had overcome countless obstacles to get there, from the lack of representation in her field to the veiled prejudice that often permeated the corporate environment. But she was ready. She was ready to prove her worth, to break barriers, and to build a brighter future for her family. Upon arriving at Innotech's modern glass and steel building, Aisha felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The lobby was a spectacle of minimalist design, with interactive screens displaying the company's latest projects. She was greeted by a warm smile from a receptionist and directed to her new department. The environment was vibrant, with young talents from diverse backgrounds, but Aisha noticed the scarcity of faces like hers in leadership positions. A subtle observation, but one that did not go unnoticed by her keen eyes. Her first day was a whirlwind of information, meetings, and new faces. She was introduced to the team, and most seemed genuinely welcoming. However, 2 encounters in particular left a lasting impression, and not in the best way. The first was with her department director, Ms. Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn, a middle-aged white woman with impeccably styled blonde hair and a gaze that seemed to analyze every detail, greeted Aisha with a polished smile, but her eyes conveyed a calculating coldness. She was the personification of cold elegance, with an impeccable wardrobe and a posture that exuded authority. However, beneath the polished surface, Evelyn possessed questionable morals, believing that power and position justified any means to achieve her goals. Her mind was sharp and strategic, but her heart was hardened by prejudice and the need for control, seeing diversity as a threat to her comfort zone. "Welcome, Aisha," Evelyn said, in a voice that was almost a whisper. "I hope you adapt quickly. We don't have time for inexperience here." The phrase, though spoken in an apparently neutral tone, carried a subtext of distrust, a subtle insinuation that Aisha would need to prove her worth more than others. The second encounter was with the Vice President of Projects, Mr. Richard Sterling. Richard, a white man in his early 40s with an athletic physique and a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes, shook Aisha's hand with excessive firmness. He exuded a self-confidence that bordered on arrogance, always with a witty remark on the tip of his tongue. Richard was an opportunist who saw women as stepping stones in his professional climb and did not hesitate to use his power to gain favors. His mind was sharp and ambitious, but his morality was distorted by ingrained sexism and an insatiable thirst for control and personal gratification. "Aisha, it's a pleasure to have you with us," Richard said, with a glint in his eyes that made Aisha feel uncomfortable. I'm sure your talent will be very useful to the company and to me personally." The last phrase was said with a suggestive tone, a veiled invitation that sent a shiver down Aisha's spine. She quickly averted her gaze, trying to ignore the feeling that there was something rotten in the kingdom of Innotech. At the end of the day, exhausted but determined, Aisha took the subway back home. As she watched the Minneapolis urban landscape pass by the window, she reflected on the challenges that awaited her. Innotech was a place of opportunities, yes, but also a minefield of prejudice and power games. She knew that her journey would be dual, that she would have to fight not only for her place in the company, but also against the shadows of racism and sexism that seemed to lurk in every corner. But Aisha was not one to give up. She had her children, her passion for technology, and the strength of her ancestors. And that, she knew, would be more than enough to face any challenge that came her way. Aisha's first months at Innotech were a whirlwind of learning and adaptation. She dove headfirst into projects, demonstrating her competence and innovative vision. Her teammates, for the most part, welcomed her, recognizing her talent and dedication. However, the shadows Aisha had sensed on the first day began to materialize, casting a veil of discomfort over her journey. Evelyn Hayes, the department director, was the embodiment of veiled racism. Her actions were subtle, almost imperceptible to a less attentive eye, but to Aisha, they were like fine needles, piercing her confidence. Evelyn had a habit of forgetting Aisha's name in important meetings, or attributing her ideas to white colleagues with an innocent smile and an, "Oh, sorry dear, I thought that was Mark's idea." She praised Aisha for her dedication and effort, but never for her intelligence or innovation, as she did with others. In presentations, Evelyn often interrupted Aisha, rephrasing her sentences with more palatable language for the board, as if Aisha's voice alone wasn't enough. She never invited her to informal lunches with the leadership team, where important decisions were often made, and always found an excuse not to include her in more visible projects. Evelyn operated with a calculating coldness, her discrimination disguised under a layer of impeccable professionalism, making her even more unbearable. She didn't need to shout or use offensive terms. Her racism manifested in silent exclusion, denial of opportunities, and forced invisibility. Richard Sterling, on the other hand, was a more obvious predator. His sexism was blatant, and he made no effort to hide it. He had a habit of commenting on Aisha's appearance, complimenting her dress or her hair in a way that made her feel objectified. In meetings, he constantly interrupted her, dismissing her opinions with a condescending smile and a, "With all due respect, Aisha, but I don't think you quite understood the scope of the project." He invited her to business dinners outside of work hours, always with a suggestive tone, implying that her advancement in the company depended on favors that went beyond the professional. Richard was the type of man who felt entitled to own the space and the people in it, especially women. His arrogance was palpable, and his charming smile turned into a sneer when Aisha refused his advances. He was the personification of toxic masculinity, a man who used his position of power to intimidate and exploit, making him a truly detestable antagonist. Aisha, with her unwavering resilience, tried to ignore the provocations, focusing on her work. She knew she had to be impeccable, that any slip-up would be used against her. But the dual journey was taking its toll. Evelyn's microaggressions and Richard's advances were a heavy burden, adding a layer of stress and exhaustion to her already challenging routine as a single mother. She found herself working longer hours, tirelessly reviewing her projects, only to have her ideas appropriated or her contributions minimized. Each day, the feeling of being on a battlefield where her race and gender were the weapons used against her intensified. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating meeting where Evelyn had presented Aisha's idea as her own, and Richard had made a derogatory comment about her female sensitivity, Aisha felt anger bubbling up. She went to the restroom, locked the door, and allowed herself to cry. It wasn't a cry of weakness, but of exhaustion, of frustration. She looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes red, but still determined. "I won't let them break me," she whispered to herself. "I fought too hard to get here." She knew she couldn't keep ignoring it. The shadows in the office were becoming too dense, threatening to suffocate her light. Aisha needed a strategy, a plan to combat the racism and sexism that permeated Innovatech. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for Jamal and Nia, for all the black women who would come after her. The journey would be long, but Aisha was ready for the battle. She took a deep breath, washed her face, and left the restroom with a new determination in her eyes. The fight had just begun. Aisha knew the battle would be fought on multiple fronts. Evelyn and Richard, though acting in distinct ways, shared a common goal: to undermine her position and, if possible, eliminate her from the scene. The web of manipulation they began to weave was subtle but relentless, designed to isolate Aisha and make her doubt her own capabilities. Evelyn, with her mastery of institutional racism, began to delegate tasks to Aisha that at first glance seemed important, but which in reality were traps. She assigned her projects with unrealistic deadlines, limited resources, and unmotivated teams. In team meetings, Evelyn publicly praised Aisha's effort, but always added a comment that diminished the impact of her work. Aisha has been very dedicated to this project, despite the inherent challenges of her learning curve, she would say, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, planting the seed of doubt in her colleagues' minds. She also began to spread subtle rumors about Aisha's lack of experience in certain technical domains, or about her difficulty adapting to the company culture, all with a tone of false concern. The most insidious of Evelyn's attacks was the appropriation of ideas. Aisha, in her passion for innovation, always presented creative and efficient solutions. Evelyn, with her strategic mind, absorbed them, slightly reformulated them, and presented them as her own in meetings with senior management. Aisha watched her creations come to life under Evelyn's name, and anger and frustration grew in her chest. She tried to confront Evelyn, but the director always had a ready excuse, a polished smile, and an, "Oh dear, you must have misunderstood me. We're all working together here, aren't we?" The lack of recognition was a constant blow, an attempt to erase her existence and her value. Richard, in turn, intensified his sexist advances. He began sending text messages and emails outside of work hours, with invitations to happy hours and business dinners that were clearly attempts at personal encounters. When Aisha refused, he became more aggressive, with passive-aggressive comments about her lack of ambition or her inability to blend in. On one occasion, he cornered her in the hallway with a lecherous smile. "Aisha, you're a very beautiful woman and talented. It's a shame you don't know how to use your attributes to advance your career. Some of us here know how to reward extra effort." Richard's tone was a veiled threat, a promise that her professional life could become hell if she didn't yield to his desires. He used his power and position to create a hostile work environment where Aisha felt constantly under surveillance, objectified, and disrespected. The web of manipulation tightened. Aisha began to feel the weight of isolation. Some colleagues, noticing the toxic dynamic, began to distance themselves, afraid of being associated with her and becoming targets of Evelyn and Richard. Others, more naive, were easily influenced by rumors and insinuations and looked at her with distrust. Aisha felt like a chess piece in a cruel game where her moves were constantly monitored and her intentions distorted. At home, the dual journey became even heavier. Aisha strove to maintain normalcy for Jamal and Nia, but the stress of work began to show. She felt exhausted, her mind constantly occupied with deciphering Evelyn and Richard's intentions and finding a way to protect herself. Nights were filled with insomnia and days with a constant sense of alertness. She knew she couldn't let it get to her, that she needed to be strong for her children, but the loneliness of the struggle was a heavy burden. One night, while Jamal and Nia slept, Aisha sat in front of her computer, reviewing Richard's emails and notes from meetings where Evelyn had appropriated her ideas. Anger and frustration mingled with a sense of powerlessness. She knew she had to act, but how? How to fight against enemies so powerful and so skilled at manipulating reality? She felt cornered, but the flame of resilience still burned in her chest. Aisha knew she couldn't give up. The web of manipulation was tight, but she was determined to find a way to free herself and to expose the truth behind the shadows in the office. The next phase of her journey would require courage, strategy, and the search for unexpected allies.
Aisha knew that passivity would lead her nowhere. Evelyn and Richard's web of manipulation was becoming increasingly suffocating, and the feeling of powerlessness, though painful, served as a catalyst for action. She needed to resist, and for that, she needed allies. The first person she thought of was Marcus, a teammate who had always treated her with respect and who seemed to have a keen sense of justice. Marcus, a black man in his early 30s, with a well-groomed beard and eyes that conveyed calm perceptiveness, was a brilliant software engineer. He was known for his impeccable work ethic and his ability to solve complex problems. Marcus was a man of few words, but his actions spoke louder. He was loyal to his principles and did not tolerate injustice, which made him a valuable ally. Aisha arranged to meet Marcus for coffee outside of work hours at a discreet location. She hesitated for a moment, fearing he would see her as a complainer or that he would distance himself to avoid trouble. But the need to vent and seek guidance was greater than the fear. She told him about Evelyn's microaggressions, about the appropriation of her ideas, and about Richard's advances. Marcus listened attentively, without interrupting, his eyes fixed on Aisha, conveying silent understanding. "I noticed some strange things," Marcus finally said. "Evelyn has a history of managing people she considers a threat, and Richard, well, Richard is Richard. He's always been like that. But I never thought he'd go this far." He paused, thoughtful. "Do you have any proof? Emails, messages, recordings?" Aisha nodded. "I have some emails from Richard and detailed notes from all the meetings where Evelyn appropriated my ideas, but I don't have recordings. I'm afraid of getting caught." Marcus looked at her seriously. "You need to start documenting everything, Aisha. Every incident, every comment, every email. Emails are crucial. If he sends you messages outside of hours, save them. If he makes inappropriate comments, write down the date, time, and what was said. And if you can record any conversation, even if it's just audio, do it. It's your word against theirs, and they have power. Documentation is your best weapon." Marcus's advice was a turning point. Aisha began to meticulously document everything. She created a secret file on her computer where she recorded every incident, every derogatory comment, every suspicious email. She began to discreetly record conversations with Richard, using her cell phone's voice recorder whenever he tried to approach her with his indecent proposals. She also started sending emails to herself with copies of her ideas and projects to have a record of her authorship. In addition to Marcus, Aisha sought support from a network of black women in tech, an online group she had found a few months ago. There, she found a safe space to share her experiences, to vent, and to receive advice from other women who had faced similar challenges. The solidarity and support of these women were a balm to her soul, reminding her that she was not alone in this fight. They encouraged her to continue documenting, to seek legal advice, and not to be silent. The next step was to approach the Human Resources Department. Aisha knew it would be a risk, but it was a necessary step. She scheduled a meeting with Miss Davies, the head of HR. Miss Davies, a middle-aged white woman with a serious expression and glasses that constantly slipped down her nose, was known for her rigid stance and strict adherence to company policies. She was the personification of bureaucracy, more concerned with following protocols than with solving real problems. Her morality was ambiguous, oscillating between impartiality and convenience, always prioritizing the company's image above all else. Her mind was logical and methodical, but her empathy was limited, which made her a difficult figure to deal with. Aisha presented her case with all the evidence she had collected. Miss Davies listened with an impassive expression, jotting everything down in her notepad. At the end of the meeting, she said, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Miss Hayes. We will investigate.
But I need to warn you that occasions like these are very serious, and if they are not proven, they can have consequences for you." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Aisha knew that Miss Davies was more concerned with protecting the company than with protecting her. But Aisha was not intimidated. She had taken the first official step. Resistance was growing, and the search for support was bearing fruit. She knew the battle would be long and difficult, but now she had allies, evidence, and a support network that strengthened her. Evelyn and Richard's web of manipulation was about to unravel, and Aisha was ready to pull the threads, one by one, until the truth came to light. The fight for justice had just begun, and Aisha was more determined than ever to win.
The HR investigation, as Aisha had predicted, dragged on. Miss Davies, with her inflexible bureaucracy, seemed more interested in suppressing the case than in resolving it. However, Aisha's meticulous documentation and Marcus's discreet support began to take effect. The evidence was too strong to be completely ignored, and internal pressure, though silent, began to grow. The turning point came during a crucial project meeting. Aisha had spent weeks developing a new software architecture that promised to revolutionize how Innovatech handled its data. It was a high-risk, high-reward project, and Aisha knew it was her chance to prove her worth once and for all. Evelyn, as usual, tried to minimize her contributions, and Richard, with his lecherous smile, made a comment about how Aisha should be more relaxed to present her ideas. Aisha took a deep breath. It was now or never. She looked at Evelyn, who tried to avert her gaze, and at Richard, who watched her with an air of superiority. "Excuse me, Evelyn," Aisha said, her voice calm but firm. Cutting off the director's speech, "I'd like to present the architecture I developed for this project. And Richard, my attributes do not include relaxation, but rather competence and innovation, something that seems to be lacking in your assessments." A tense silence hung over the room. Evelyn and Richard exchanged glances, surprised by Aisha's audacity. She continued, presenting her proposal with clarity and confidence, explaining every technical detail with mastery. When Evelyn tried to interrupt her again, she stared directly at her. "Evelyn, with all due respect, this is my presentation, and these are my ideas, not yours." The shock in the room was palpable. Evelyn, accustomed to having total control, was visibly irritated. Richard, in turn, attempted a personal attack. "Aisha, you're being very aggressive. Perhaps it's best if you calm down and let the men handle this." That was the last straw. Aisha, with a cold smile, took out her cell phone and played a recording. It was Richard's voice, in one of his advances, offering favors in exchange for extra effort. His voice echoed in the room, clear and unmistakable. Richard's face paled, and Evelyn looked at him with a mixture of anger and panic. Aisha then showed the emails and notes that proved Evelyn's appropriation of her ideas. "These are the proofs, Miss Davies," Aisha said, looking directly at the head of HR who was present at the meeting. "Racism and sexism are not learning curves or female aggression. They are crimes, and I will no longer tolerate them." The confrontation was explosive. The meeting was suspended, and Evelyn and Richard were immediately removed from their positions, pending a more in-depth internal investigation. The news spread like wildfire through Innovatech. Many colleagues who had previously distanced themselves from Aisha now looked at her with admiration and respect. Some, embarrassed, came to apologize for their passivity. Marcus, with a discreet smile, gave a thumbs up, proud of Aisha's courage. In the following days, Innovatech became the scene of a true revolution. Senior management, fearing a public scandal and legal action, acted quickly. Evelyn Hayes and Richard Sterling were dismissed for just cause. The company issued an internal statement reaffirming its commitment to diversity and inclusion and announcing a series of mandatory training sessions for all employees on racism and sexism in the workplace. Aisha was invited to participate in the development of these training sessions, and her ideas were finally recognized and valued. For Aisha, the turning point was bittersweet.
The victory was undeniable, but the emotional cost had been high. She had faced her demons, exposed the truth, and in doing so, paved the way for others. Innovatech, once a minefield, began to transform into a more just and equitable place. Aisha knew that the fight was not over, that racism and sexism were evils rooted in society, but she had proven that resistance was possible, that the voice of a black single mother could echo and bring down giants. The journey continued, but now Aisha walked with her head held high, knowing that her dual journey, though challenging, was also an inexhaustible source of strength and inspiration.
With Evelyn and Richard gone, the atmosphere at Innovatech changed dramatically. The air, once heavy with tension and veiled prejudice, now felt lighter, more breathable. Aisha, who had once felt like a stranger in her own team, began to flourish. Her ideas, once minimized, were now heard with attention and enthusiasm. Her voice, once silenced, echoed through the company's corridors, inspiring others to speak up. It wasn't long before Aisha's talent and leadership were formally recognized. At a board meeting, with all managers and vice presidents present, Innovatech's CEO, Mr. Harrison, announced Aisha's promotion to Senior Director of Innovation. It was a prestigious position, placing her at the top of the company's hierarchy with real power to shape the future of technology and organizational culture. The announcement was met with genuine applause and smiles from her colleagues, especially Marcus, who looked at her with silent pride. For Aisha, the promotion was not just a recognition of her hard work, but a symbol of victory. It was proof that resilience, truth, and justice could indeed prevail over racism and sexism. She accepted the promotion with humility, but with the determination to use her new position to create a more inclusive and equitable work environment for everyone, especially for women and minorities who, like her, had faced invisible barriers. Her first initiative as senior director was the creation of a mentorship program for women and minorities in technology. She knew that the lack of representation was one of the biggest obstacles to the advancement of diverse talents, and she was determined to change that reality. Aisha dedicated time and energy to mentoring young professionals, sharing her experience, her knowledge, and, above all, her resilience. She became an inspiration, a beacon of hope for those who, like her, dreamed of breaking barriers and achieving success. In addition to the mentorship program, Aisha implemented a series of diversity and inclusion policies at Innovatech. She worked tirelessly to ensure that hiring processes were fair and impartial, that promotion opportunities were accessible to all, and that the company's culture was truly welcoming and respectful. She organized workshops and lectures on racism and sexism, inviting experts and promoting open and honest dialogue on these sensitive topics. Innovatech, under Aisha's leadership, was becoming a model of diversity and inclusion in the technology sector. At home, Aisha's life also flourished. Jamal and Nia, who had witnessed their mother's struggle, now saw her victory. They were proud of her, and Aisha strove to be an example of strength and determination for them. She spent more time with her children, sharing her achievements and teaching them the importance of fighting for their rights and never giving up on their dreams. The house, once a refuge from work stress, was now a home of joy and inspiration, where love and mutual support were the pillars. Aisha's story spread beyond Innovatech's walls. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and events, sharing her journey and inspiring thousands of people. Her voice, once silenced, now echoed on stages across the country, becoming a symbol of resilience and empowerment. She became a tireless advocate for equality, using her platform to fight for a more just and equitable world for all. The legacy of Aisha was not just her promotion or the policies she implemented, it was the change she inspired in people, the courage she instilled in those who felt invisible, the hope she ignited in the hearts of those who had lost faith. Her journey, though marked by challenges and adversities, was a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of truth, and the ability of a single person to make a difference. Aisha's dual journey had transformed into a triumph, a legacy that would continue to inspire generations, reminding everyone that the fight for equality is a continuous journey, but that with courage and determination, victory is always possible.